The man in the black tactical vest pointed at my houseboat with a clipboard and shouted, "You have 24 hours to vacate, or we bring in demolition." His fake badge gleamed in the sunlight, but what he didn't know was that I'm an undercover federal agent, and I'd just uncovered the biggest scam in this waterfront HOA's history. It started with a knock on metal, sharp, deliberate rap on the side of my houseboat at 7 a.m. I was halfway through my first sip of coffee, barefoot, enjoying the soft creak of the dock and the gentle splash of morning waves. The marina was usually quiet at this hour. Most residents didn't stir until later. This was a place people came to slow down, not rush. So, the sudden knock had weight to it. I put down my mug and stepped outside, still in a t-shirt and flannel pants, to find a stocky man in mirrored sunglasses and a black polo that read Lakeside HOA Security. He was holding a clipboard like it was a weapon. "You, the owner of this floating structure?" he asked. "Yes, I am," I replied, my voice steady. He didn't know who he was talking to yet, and I wasn't going to tell him not until I had to. "This houseboat is in violation of several HOA visual and docking regulations," he said, flipping a few pages dramatically. "It's too brightly painted, it blocks the community's line of sight, and it hasn't passed the mandatory HOA inspection. You're required to register any structure exceeding 10 meters in length with our compliance office." I blinked, slowly. First of all, this was a public marina. There was no homeowners association with jurisdiction here. Second, my boat had been inspected, registered, and cleared by the city's harbor office before I even docked it 6 months ago. "I haven't heard of any HOA around here," I said calmly. "Who do you report to?" The man stiffened a bit. "We're a new enforcement branch. Brent Callahan, head of security. We keep this place from turning into a free-for-all." Got it. I nodded slowly. "Well, I'll need to see documentation that shows who authorized your operation and what jurisdiction you have." Brent smirked and tapped the fake badge on his chest. "All you need to know is that we've got the authority to find, tow, and, if necessary, remove structures that don't comply. You've got until next Friday to repaint this thing and file the right forms. Otherwise, we escalate." He turned and walked off like he was in some low-budget TV show. I watched him disappear down the dock, clipboard swinging like he'd just delivered a death sentence. I went back inside, heart steady, mind alert. C. What Brent didn't know was that I wasn't just some guy who liked boats and quiet mornings. I'm a federal agent, undercover for most of my career. After years of intense high-risk operations, narcotics, human trafficking rings, financial fraud, I'd finally been given the go-ahead to take a quieter assignment. Technically, I was still active, assigned to a fraud division monitoring HOA-related scams across state lines. But nobody in this town knew that. Not even the marina manager. I was supposed to stay invisible. Observe, document, report. Only step in if it got serious. But this, a fake security head threatening residents with bogus rules. I was starting to smell something bigger than a control freak with a badge printer. Later that morning, I walked over to a few other houseboats and casually asked neighbors if they'd had any visits. An older couple, Tom and Edna, sweet folks in their 70s, said Brent had left a warning on their door claiming their wind chimes were a nuisance device. They didn't understand what was going on but were too nervous to push back. A single mom named Kelsey, who lived on a bright yellow boat with her 6-year-old son, said she'd gotten a $400 fine for child noise pollution. I asked her if she'd ever signed anything from an HOA. She hadn't. That night, I sat down at my small desk inside the houseboat and started digging. I pulled up local property records, checked city permits, scanned marina ownership documents. Nothing mentioned an HOA, no filings, no recognized authority. Lakeside HOA didn't exist in any city database. I even ran a name check on Brent Callahan. No professional licenses, no registered business. Just a guy who, 6 months ago, started showing up with a clipboard and a tough guy attitude. I took some quiet photos of his uniform the next day. The patch on his sleeve looked official at a glance, but on closer inspection, it was cheap embroidery, like something ordered online. His badge number was just for zeros. I watched as he handed out more warnings to unsuspecting residents, threatening to escalate to removal. I kept quiet, but inside, I was already building a case file. The next morning, I saw something that confirmed my suspicion. Brent was walking dock to dock with 2 men in matching outfits, same black polo shirts, same badges, same fake patches. They looked like a security squad but acted like playground bullies. One of them pointed at a boat, laughed and said, "We'll sink that eyesore next week." I snapped photos with a long lens from my deck, noting the time, their words, their posture. These weren't community volunteers. This was a coordinated scam. By the end of the week, my neighbors were panicked. Rumors were flying that a barge was coming with demolition gear. Brent left a paper taped to my boat saying, "Final notice. Structure will be removed within 72 hours. It was typed in Comic Sans, with a fake seal that looked like someone had copied it from Google. I had what I needed, but I wasn't going to jump the gun. I wanted them caught red-handed, so I made a few quiet calls to local law enforcement. I didn't reveal my identity yet, I just gave them the facts. Possible impersonation, Fake authority, attempted extortion. I wanted them nearby in case things went south. Because deep down I knew Brent wasn't going to stop with just threats. He was building towards something big. And whatever that was, I had to be ready. The sun hadn't fully risen when the barge arrived. It was big. Too big for this little marina. It rumbled in like a mechanical beast, loaded with rusted equipment, a backhoe, some kind of crane arm, steel chains hanging off hooks. The marina shook as it idled near the edge of the dock, casting a long shadow over the calm lake. Brent stood proudly at the front, arms folded, sunglasses on, grinning like he had just rolled in with a wrecking crew, which apparently he had. I stood on my deck, coffee in hand, watching from behind my sunglasses. I wasn't surprised. I'd heard the whispers, the panic from other residents the night before. Kelsey came to my boat in tears, clutching a new citation Brent had left that said her paddleboard was an unauthorized water vehicle. Edna was terrified, saying Brent had threatened to cut the mooring lines to her boat if she didn't pay her fines. It wasn't just bullying anymore. It was coercion, extortion, and I'd had enough. But the thing about being undercover is you don't blow your cover unless you absolutely must. I wasn't going to flash my badge too early and give them time to disappear, so I kept gathering, watching, recording. Brent stepped off the barge with his two sidekicks, the same two muscleheads in knockoff tactical boots. They carried clipboards like they were legal warrants. One of them wore a headset with no earpiece connected. The act was almost laughable except for the real fear I saw in my neighbor's eyes. "Attention, residents," Brent shouted down the dock like he owned the place. "This is your final notice. All non-compliant structures will be marked and scheduled for removal today. If you interfere, you'll be subject to HOA-level enforcement." He held up a rolled poster board with red markings. A sloppy map of the marina, with big red X's over 3 boats including mine. "You can't do this," someone yelled from a few boats down. "This is illegal," Edna cried, holding Tom's hand tight. Brent didn't flinch. "We're acting under emergency authority. Section 41B of HOA code." There was no such code. I knew that, but no one else did. That's what made it so dangerous. I activated the tiny lapel mic I'd hidden under my shirt collar. It was already connected to a small transmitter inside my boat. Everything Brent said was now being recorded, every fake law, every threat, every false claim of power. I sent the feed to a secure app where it would upload in real time. I wasn't alone anymore. Then Brent turned toward my boat, his eyes locked onto mine like a predator spotting prey. "Hey you colorboat guy," he said smugly. "You were warned. You think you're above the rules." "I think I follow real laws," I said calmly. That ticked him off. His nostrils flared. "Step off your boat now." I didn't move. "Not until you show me proper identification. Not that badge you ordered from the internet." Brent marched up the dock, clipboard raised like a weapon. "You're obstructing an HOA officer. I can have you detained." "Try me," I said. He got within 5 feet of me, close enough that I could smell the energy drink on his breath. He was trying to intimidate me. He didn't know who I was. Not yet. Then it happened. A silver pickup truck rolled into the lot behind the marina, lights flashing, unmarked but official. I recognized it. It belonged to a detective from the local sheriff's department. I'd reached out to him the night before, quietly, gave him the evidence, told him what was coming. We agreed I'd signal if things escalated. I gave the signal. I raised my phone and tapped it twice. The detective nodded and got out, flanked by 2 uniformed deputies. Brent hadn't seen them yet. He was too busy yelling at my boat last. "Warning," Brent said. "Get off your boat or we're hauling it out." "I'd love to see you try," I said, stepping down to the dock. That's when I pulled out my badge. Brent's mouth froze mid-word. His fake confidence evaporated. "I'm a federal agent. Division of Housing and Urban Fraud. You and your partners are under investigation for impersonating law enforcement, issuing fraudulent fines, and threatening residents under false authority." His 2 sidekicks started backing away. "You're lying," Brent spat. "You're just trying to scare me." That's when the sheriff's deputies stepped up behind him. "No, he's not," one of them said, clapping a hand on Brent's shoulder. "But you should be scared. You're under arrest." Brent spun around, stunned. "You can't arrest me. This is HOA business." "There is no HOA," the detective said. "We've already confirmed that. You're a fake, and we've got the paperwork, recordings and statements to prove it." Handcuffs clicked. Brent's sunglasses fell from his face as he struggled, but it was over. The barge captain, realizing the show was done, quietly detached from the dock and started drifting away, trying to leave the scene. Another officer waved him down before he got too far. The marina was silent for a long moment. Everyone just watched. No one cheered, no one moved. It was like they didn't believe it had really happened. Then Edna clapped and everyone followed. It wasn't loud or wild. It was quiet, relieved applause. Like a breath finally released after months of holding it in. I turned to Kelsey and nodded. "It's over." She looked at me like she'd just realized I wasn't who I'd claimed to be and smiled. "You really had our backs, huh?" "I was hoping I wouldn't have to," I said. "But sometimes bullies don't back down until you stand taller." Brent and his goons were taken away in separate cruisers. The citations were collected, the fake paperwork seized. The Marina owner, who had been tricked like the rest, came out from the office, red-faced and apologetic, promising to personally review every resident's case. But for now, the dock was safe again, and the water was calm. The Marina felt different after the arrests. Calmer, yes, but also shaken. People smiled more, but their eyes carried questions. How had it gone so far? How could someone pretend to be an authority figure, storm in with bogus laws, and nearly get away with it? The truth was, scams like Brent's weren't rare. They happened in quiet places, where people just wanted peace and weren't looking for a fight. And Brent had taken advantage of that. But now that he was gone, the dust had settled, and it was time to dig into the full story. That night, I sat on the deck of my houseboat, laptop open, logs and files spread out around me. The Marina was quiet except for the occasional lapping of water against the dock and a far-off loon call echoing across the lake. My inbox buzzed with reports from the sheriff's department and a background trace I'd requested earlier. Brent Callahan wasn't a first-time offender. His real name was Brent Joseph Ralston. 2 years ago, he'd been investigated in Oregon for operating a fake parking enforcement company in an upscale neighborhood. He wore a yellow vest, printed fake tickets, and intimidated people into paying made-up violations until a real officer got suspicious. No charges stuck that time due to lack of evidence. A year later, he tried to pass himself off as a private investigator in Nevada, issuing code compliance warnings to homeowners who parked RVs on their properties. Again, he vanished just before the law caught up. This time, though, we had him with the recordings, the false documents, the threats to residents, and the illegal attempt to remove private property. Brent and his crew were looking at multiple charges: impersonating law enforcement, criminal extortion, falsifying official documents, and conspiracy to defraud. That barge they brought in, rented under a fake company name, even the invoices they issued to residents were traced to a burner phone and a P.O. box in another state. The following morning, I met with Detective Reyes, the sheriff's investigator I'd contacted before things got ugly. We sat on a bench outside the local precinct, sipping coffee while watching fishermen unload their morning catch across the street. "You weren't kidding," Reyes said, flipping through the file I'd handed him. "This guy's a full-blown predator. Knows how to talk tough, keep people scared, move fast, then disappear. Classic pattern," I said. "Low-risk targets. Elderly residents, single parents, people who don't want trouble. Any chance he was working with someone bigger? A ring, possibly." I nodded, but this op felt sloppy, almost like a last-minute move. He might have gotten desperate. Reyes leaned back. "You staying in town?" "For a little while," I said. "Want to make sure everyone here feels safe again." That afternoon I walked to the dock with a different purpose, not as an observer, but as someone finally allowed to be known. Residents came out of their boats and cabins to talk, to ask questions, and to say thanks. I tried to keep it simple. I wasn't there for praise. I just wanted them to know they weren't alone. Dom and Edna invited me in for lemon tea. Kelsey gave me a hug so strong it knocked the air out of my lungs. Even Mike, the grumpy guy with the rusted fishing boat who never spoke more than 5 words, gave me a firm nod and said, "Good job, officer." By evening, the Marina manager called a small meeting near the central dock. Chairs were set up, a few lanterns flickered, people brought snacks and drinks. I was asked to speak, which I don't usually do unless I have to, but something told me these folks deserved a bit of the truth. "I came here for peace," I told them. "Not to police anything, but when someone threatens your peace, especially someone pretending to be the law, you've got a right to stand up." There were murmurs of agreement. A few people clapped quietly. What Brent did was more than a scam. He tried to take away your sense of safety, and that's not something we allow. However, the law doesn't wear fake badges, and it doesn't hide behind clipboards. It wasn't a speech, just words from one resident to another, but it felt right. The next day, I helped the Marina post new signs: "No tread, authorized enforcement allowed." We also created a clear chain of communication, actual contacts with the City Harbor Office, local law enforcement, and the Marina Board. Everything transparent, everything real. But the biggest change wasn't on paper, it was in the people. The community, which had once kept to itself, was now tighter. Neighbors who had barely spoken were now helping each other fix docks, repaint boats, and share food. Someone even started a newsletter, Dock Talk Weekly. Edna was the editor. It had a crossword puzzle and a recipe section. Brent thought he was breaking a weak community, but what he accidentally did was light a fire under it. And as for me, I could have packed up and moved to the next assignment, but I didn't. Not yet. The agency gave me the green light to stay put for a while. Community liaison, they called it. I just called it living. There was still a lot to sort through. Brent had left damage, both financial and emotional, but we were handling it together. That night, I stood on the deck of my boat, coffee in one hand, stars above, water below. Somewhere down the dock, a guitar was playing softly. Laughter echoed across the lake. This wasn't just a quiet marina anymore. It was a home worth protecting. A few peaceful weeks passed. The Marina, once tense and unsure, had bloomed into something better than I ever expected: a real community. Boats were being repaired, kids played freely on the docks, and neighbors who used to keep their heads down now waved and shared stories. It felt like healing. But trouble never disappears, just shifts. One morning I received an envelope tucked inside my Dockside mailbox. No return address. Inside was a single printed photo, me standing in front of the Marina office, talking to the detective. On the back a handwritten message read, "You should have stayed undercover." I held the photo for a long moment, heart steady but jaw clenched. It wasn't a threat, it was a warning. Somebody was watching me. The timing was too precise to ignore. Brent and his crew were still in jail awaiting trial, so this wasn't from them directly. But it meant something more dangerous. Someone else had been involved in the scam, quietly from the shadows. Someone who didn't appreciate their operation being shut down. I immediately called Detective Reyes. He came down within the hour and took the photo for evidence. Could be a copycat, or someone trying to scare you off, he said. Or it's someone who was benefiting from Brent's racket but stayed behind the curtain, I replied. Somebody who made real money while Brent played the clown up front. We walked through the Marina, slowly, quietly, looking for anything that felt out of place. My instincts told me this wasn't over. Brent had been the face of the scam, but he wasn't smart enough to build the whole thing himself. That night, I reviewed the files again. Brent's fake HOA operation had collected thousands of dollars in fines and fees, all in cash or through untraceable payment apps. Where had that money gone? None of it was recovered during the arrest. His accounts were empty. No large purchases, no cars, no boats, no stashed funds. It meant the money was still out there and possibly still moving. I dug deeper into the fake documents Brent used. The letterheads, the logos, the citations, everything pointed to one central hub, a rented office space uptown under the name Community Management Solutions. It had been paid for in cash for 6 months, then abruptly abandoned 2 days before Brent's arrest. The rental agreement was signed by someone named Stanley Voss, a fake name, clearly, but I had the lease paperwork. The office buildings. Security logs showed that a man in his 40s, with a shaved head, had visited the suite regularly for several months. I called in a few favors from an old tech contact in the agency. He pulled nearby traffic cam footage and caught the license plate of a black SUV that had been parked outside the building during key dates. The vehicle was registered to a Jonathan Pearson, ex-real estate agent with a suspended license due to previous fraud investigations. There it was. The missing link. Pierce was the money man. Brent was just the puppet. According to the file. Pierce had operated compliance services across state lines, always under different names. He specialized in preying on private neighborhoods and retirement communities, using fake legal threats to collect fines, then vanish. He'd been investigated twice but never charged. Slick, quiet, and always behind someone else. And now, I had his name. I decided to visit him, not as a cop, not with a badge, just as myself. His office was located 30 miles out of town, a shabby space in a corporate plaza next to a tanning salon and a closed-down gym. I walked in and found a clean, empty waiting room. A woman at the front desk looked up quickly. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," I said, "but I think he'll want to see me." She hesitated, then picked up the phone. A moment later, she pointed toward a frosted glass door at the end of the hall. I walked in. Jonathan Pierce stood behind a desk, white button-down shirt, gold watch, cool expression. He looked me up and down and smiled. "I figured you'd show up," he said. "You look like the type who doesn't let things go." "I don't," I replied, "especially not when good people get threatened and someone makes a business out of fear." He shrugged casually. "Brent was reckless. I told him not to go that far. You wouldn't believe how easy it is to get folks to pay a fake fine if you make it sound official. And what, you're just the brains behind the curtain." "I offer services," he said. "HOAs are messy. I just give communities the tools to enforce order. You gave a conman chains and a barge. I gave him paper and advice," he replied, voiced cold. Everything else was his own ambition. I took a deep breath, letting him talk. He was arrogant, confident, but also stupid enough to keep records. I scanned the office, noting the security cameras, the paper trail, the folders stacked neatly in his file cabinet. "You're going down for this, Pierce," I said. "You crossed a line." He leaned back. "You think you're going to scare me? You're just one guy living on a boat. I've got 10 more projects running in 3 states. That was his mistake. He admitted too much. I left quietly, not making a scene. I didn't need to. By the time I got back to the Marina, I had already uploaded the recorded conversation. My agency contact had everything he needed. Pierce wouldn't know it until it was too late. That evening, as the sun dipped low over the lake, casting long, gold reflections across the still water, I sat on my deck and exhaled. One threat had been dealt with, but another was unfolding. This wasn't just about one Marina. This was a bigger scheme, one that spanned across towns and states, targeting the vulnerable and the quiet. But this time, I wasn't just defending my dock. I was going to burn the whole fake empire to the ground. The sun rose red over the lake, casting a warm glow across the houseboats as the town slowly came to life. I watched from my deck, coffee in hand, feeling that familiar, calm return to my chest. The kind of calm that only comes after a when you know the work is nearly done. Jonathan Pierce thought he was untouchable. He believed he could hide behind fake names, fake companies, and fake authority. He thought he was smarter than the system that people like him would always get away with it. What he didn't count on was that sometimes the law lives in a houseboat and keeps a low profile until it's time to strike. Within 48 hours of my visit to Pierce's office, everything was in motion. The agency had launched a multi-state operation. With the information I collected, audio recordings, financial trails, digital correspondence, and those cozy little shell companies he thought no one would find. I didn't have to do the takedown myself. This wasn't just about our sleepy Marina anymore. It was bigger, deeper, and far more widespread than anyone imagined. Pierce had built an empire of fear. His business model was painfully simple: create fake HOAs, send official-looking documents, and use people like Brent to play enforcer. He had over a dozen dummy companies across 5 states, all funneling money into a network of untraceable accounts. He targeted small lakeside communities, rural neighborhoods, and retirees who didn't ask too many questions. But thanks to the operation we started, Operation Quiet Dock, they were all being exposed. Arrests started popping up across the country. Fake officers were being pulled in, office doors were sealed, bank accounts frozen, and Pierce, he was arrested in his sleep. According to Reyes, they found him in his high-rise apartment, wearing silk pajamas, with his laptop open and an email drafted to a new client in Arizona, another small lakeside HOA he planned to exploit next. But this time, the law knocked first. Back at the Marina, life had become something else, something good, real, peaceful. There was no fear, no confusion, no threat of fake fines or demolition barges. The HOA police were gone, and the only things left were friendly neighbors, the sound of fishing lines hitting water, and the occasional clatter of a kid's bike racing down the dock. One warm afternoon, Kelsey threw a little party. Nothing big, just grilled hot dogs, iced lemonade, and a few folding chairs around a bonfire pit someone had set up beside the main dock. People brought cookies, fruit salads, even Edna's famous cinnamon bread. There was laughter, real deep laughter. I sat on an overturned cooler with my coffee and just watched. "You look more relaxed these days," Tom said, pulling up a chair beside me. "I am," I replied with a smile. "Feels like home now." Kelsey came over and handed me a plate of food. "You know, we were all scared to speak up before. We thought no one would listen. Brent made us believe we were powerless. That's what people like him do," I said. "They don't have real power. They just convince others they do." She looked at me, her eyes soft. "But you reminded us we're stronger than we think." I didn't say anything. I just nodded. Because sometimes, silence says more than a speech ever could. Later that evening, the sky turned soft shades of pink and lavender, and lanterns swayed in the breeze. Children chased fireflies, dogs barked playfully, and someone played a slow tune on a guitar. For a long moment, it felt like the whole world had slowed down just for us. Edna walked up and handed me a folded newsletter, Dock Talk Weekly issue. Number A on the front page was a drawing of a man on a houseboat, standing proudly with his arms crossed, looking out at the lake. The headline read, "Our hero on the water." I laughed and shook my head. "You really didn't have to do that. You never wanted credit," she said with a wink. "But you earned it." I looked out over the water. For the first time in a long time, I felt done. Complete. I'd spent years chasing criminals, working cases in cities that never slept, wearing disguises, changing names, moving every few months. But here, on this dock, with these people, I had found something rare, peace with a purpose. The agency offered me another assignment, big case out in Florida. Same HOA fraud, bigger network. But I turned it down. I told them I'd be more valuable right here, teaching others, helping towns recognize the signs, working directly with local agencies to build real protections for real people. They agreed. So I stayed. My houseboat got a fresh coat of paint, blue this time, with white trim. Tom helped me fix the railing, and Kelsey's son painted a little anchor on the back with yellow stars around it. It wasn't just a houseboat anymore. It was a part of this place. The Marina was no longer just a place I lived. It was a place I belonged, and every time I sipped my morning coffee on that deck, with calm water around me and neighbors who felt more like family, I remembered why I got into this line of work in the first place. Not for glory, not for power, but to protect the people who deserve to live without fear. Because sometimes justice doesn't wear a uniform. Sometimes it lives quietly on a boat and waits for the right moment to rise. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and comment your thoughts below. Subscribe to Bright Reality for more gripping real-life inspired tales every week.